In the year 146 BC, a Roman general stood on a hill outside the city of Carthage. The city was burning beneath him. It had been burning for 6 days. 750,000 people had once lived there. By the time the fires went out, fewer than 50,000 were left alive. Every one of them was sold into slavery. The walls were torn down. The harbor was filled in. Roman soldiers walked through the ruins and salted the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. The general watching all of this was Scipio Aemilianus. And as he stood there, the historian Polybius, who was standing beside him, recorded what he said. He was crying. When Polybius asked him why, Scipio told him he was thinking about Rome, about how one day his own city would meet the same end. Because that is what happens to all great empires. He had just spent 3 years destroying Carthage, and in that moment of total victory, all he could think about was that Rome would be next. To understand why a Roman general wept over the destruction of his oldest enemy, you have to go back, more than 100 years, to when there were 2 superpowers in the Mediterranean, and to the rivalry that produced the longest, most brutal, and most consequential war the ancient world had ever seen. This is the story of the 3 Punic Wars, the wars that gave Rome the world. You are watching Historical Club. By the 3rd century BC, 2 powers stood above all others in the Western Mediterranean. Rome was a young republic, aggressive, hungry, slowly conquering the Italian peninsula, one tribe and one city at a time. Its strength was its army, disciplined, patient, designed for grinding land warfare. Carthage was older, richer, smarter. Founded by Phoenician traders on the coast of what is now Tunisia, it had built the greatest commercial empire the ancient world had ever seen. Its fleets controlled the sea lanes. Its merchants were in every port. Its colonies stretched across North Africa, Spain, Sicily, and Sardinia. Think of it like the Cold War. 2 civilizations on opposite sides of one sea. One built on land, the other built on water. For decades, they avoided each other. They had treaties. They had trade. They had every reason to leave each other alone. But there was one place where their interests collided. Sicily. A triangular island sitting almost exactly between them. Rich in grain. Strategically priceless. Whichever power controlled Sicily controlled the central Mediterranean. In 264 BC, a small dispute in a Sicilian city pulled both Rome and Carthage in. Neither side wanted to back down. Neither side could afford to. And so it began. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC. 23 years of war, almost entirely fought at sea. Here is what makes this war remarkable. Rome had no navy. None. They were a land power. They had never built a serious warship in their entire history. Carthage had the most powerful navy in the world. So Rome did something almost unimaginable. They captured a wrecked Carthaginian warship that had run aground. They took it apart, plank by plank. They studied how it was built. And then they built 120 copies in 60 days. The first Roman fleet was crewed by men who had never sailed, trained on dry land, rowing wooden benches in the dirt while officers shouted at them. It should have been a disaster. Instead, the Romans invented something the Carthaginians had never seen. A boarding bridge called the corvus, a heavy wooden ramp with a metal spike at the end. When 2 ships came close, the Romans dropped the corvus onto the enemy deck. The spike locked them together, and suddenly a sea battle became a land battle, with Roman legionaries doing what they did best. Carthage lost battle after battle. Their navy, the pride of their empire, was being destroyed by a people who had never sailed before. After 23 years of fighting, Carthage was bankrupt, exhausted. They sued for peace. Rome forced them to surrender Sicily and to pay a massive war indemnity that would take them 10 years to repay. Carthage had lost, but the wound did not close. In Spain, where Carthage had retreated to rebuild its empire, a young boy was being raised by his father, a general named Hamilcar Barca. The story goes that Hamilcar took his son to a sacred altar and made him swear an oath of eternal hatred against Rome. That boy's name was Hannibal, and he was about to become the most dangerous enemy Rome would ever face. The Second Punic War. 18-2. 01 BC. Hannibal did not wait for Rome to come to him. He brought the war to Rome. He marched an army of 40,000 soldiers and 37 war elephants out of Spain, across the Pyrenees, through southern Gaul, and over the Alps, in the dead of winter, in 15 days. He lost half his men to cold, ambushes, and treacherous mountain paths. He arrived in northern Italy with 20,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and a handful of surviving elephants. Rome had over 300,000 citizens of fighting age. On paper, Hannibal was already finished. He spent the next 15 years proving paper wrong. At the Trebia River in December of 218 BC, he tricked a Roman consul into marching 36,000 soldiers across freezing water before breakfast, then ambushed them from hidden grass and crushed them from 3 sides. Then it got worse. In the summer of 216 BC, Rome decided to end this once and for all. They committed everything, 86,000 men, the largest army in Roman history. They met Hannibal on a field called Cannae. Hannibal had 50,000 soldiers. What he did to that Roman army on that day is still studied in every military academy in the world. He let his weakest troops in the center bow backwards under Roman pressure. The Romans pushed deeper, smelling victory, packing themselves tighter and tighter into a dense mass that could no longer swing swords or turn around. And then his best troops on the wings closed in. His cavalry swept around the back. The trap snapped shut. In a single afternoon, between 50 and 70,000 Roman soldiers died. Ancient sources describe bodies so tightly packed that the dead could not fall. They stayed standing, held in place by the crush. In one afternoon, Rome lost more men than the United States lost in the entire Vietnam War. When the news reached the city, Rome fell silent. The historian Livy wrote that there was no precedent. Nothing in Roman memory came close. But here is what Hannibal did not understand about Rome. It would not surrender. It would not negotiate. It raised new legions. From farm boys, from slaves it freed for the purpose, from every man who could hold a sword. And it changed how it fought. Instead of facing Hannibal directly, Rome started avoiding him, cutting his supply lines, starving his campaign, wearing him down across years. For 15 years, Hannibal walked through Italy undefeated. And for 15 years, it slowly stopped mattering. Because while Hannibal was stuck in Italy, a young Roman commander was rebuilding everything in Spain. His name was Scipio. He had fought at Cannae. He had watched the slaughter from inside it, and instead of being broken by what he saw, he had studied it. Every trap, every trick, every move. By 202 BC, Scipio had driven Carthage out of Spain, and then he did something as bold as Hannibal crossing the Alps. He took the war to Africa. Hannibal was recalled home to defend Carthage. The 2 greatest generals of their age finally met, at a place called Zama. Hannibal opened with 80 war elephants. Scipio's legions opened lanes in their formation, sounded trumpets, and let the panicked elephants run harmlessly through. Many turned back and trampled Hannibal's own cavalry. Then Scipio's cavalry, having driven the Carthaginian horsemen off the field, swept around behind Hannibal's army and slammed into its rear. It was Cannae, in reverse. Hannibal lost his first and only major battle. Carthage was finished. They surrendered their fleet. They paid massive reparations. They lost the right to make war without Roman permission. The Second Punic War was over, but Carthage was still standing. Some Romans never forgave that. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC. 50 years passed. Carthage paid off its war debt early. It rebuilt its trade. Its harbors filled with ships again. Its merchants grew rich. It did everything Rome had told it to do. It did not raise an army. It did not threaten anyone. But in Rome, an old senator named Cato the Elder watched Carthage recover. And he hated it. Every speech he gave in the Senate, no matter what the topic was, whether it was about roads, or laws, or grain prices, Cato ended with the same 5 words. Carthage must be destroyed. He said it for years, speech after speech. He carried Carthaginian figs into the Senate and dropped them on the floor to show how close the enemy still was. Rome did not need a real reason to attack Carthage. It only needed an excuse. In 149 BC, Carthage defended itself against an attack by a Roman ally. That was enough. Rome demanded Carthage surrender. Carthage agreed. Rome demanded their weapons. Carthage handed them over. 200,000 sets of armor, 2,000 catapults, every weapon in the city. Then, Rome announced its real demand. Carthage had to be abandoned. Every citizen had to leave. The city itself had to be destroyed. They could rebuild somewhere inland, away from the sea. The Carthaginians refused. They had handed over every weapon they owned. They had nothing left to fight with, and they decided to fight anyway. For 3 years, the people of Carthage held off the Roman army with weapons they made by hand. They melted down statues for metal. Women cut their hair to make ropes for catapults. Old men and children stood on the walls. It took Rome 3 years and the deployment of one of its finest generals, Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of the Scipio who beat Hannibal, to finally break in. When Roman soldiers finally entered the city, the fighting did not stop. It went house by house, street by street, for 6 days. Romans climbed across rooftops because the streets were too dangerous. When it was over, the city burned for 10 more days. Of the 700,000 people who lived in Carthage, fewer than 50,000 survived. They were all sold into slavery. The walls were torn down, the harbor was filled in, the site was ritually cursed. Carthage, the greatest commercial empire of the ancient world, was gone. And Scipio Aemilianus stood on the hill, watching it burn. And he wept. Because he was thinking about Rome. He understood something most Romans did not. Empires do not last because they are powerful. They last because they have a rival. Something to push against, something to fear. Carthage had been Rome's mirror for over 100 years. Without it, Rome had nothing left to measure itself against. He was right to weep. Within 100 years, the Roman Republic itself would tear apart in civil war. Within 500 years, the Western Empire would be gone. But before all of that, the wars with Carthage gave Rome the Mediterranean. They gave Rome its navy. They gave Rome its first overseas provinces. They gave Rome the wealth that built the empire. They gave Rome the military experience that conquered Gaul and Britain and Egypt. Without the Punic Wars, Rome stays a regional Italian power. Without the Punic Wars, there is no Caesar, no Augustus, no Roman Empire as history remembers it. 3 wars, over 100 years of bloodshed. One civilization erased from the earth so completely that for centuries, no one even knew exactly where it had stood. And the man who finished the job knew, even in his moment of triumph, that his own city would one day meet the same fate. If this story got to you, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling matters. And if you are not subscribed to Historical Club yet, now is the time. We spend weeks researching and writing these stories so they can be told properly. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments, was Cato the Elder right to demand the destruction of Carthage? Or did Rome destroy something it would later miss? Until next time, this is Historical Club.